Sonic the Hedgehog, he sure has an interesting reputation nowadays. That's what I said, and that's certainly what I meant. Well, I guess the only way to do this is to start from the top. This is gonna be kind of a spread of a lot of things. My current problems with different areas of the Sonic series, how I think they could be improved, what I want to see going forward, and other miscellaneous problems I have. So grab your popcorn, please watch the video before leaving your hate-infused comments, and allow me to take you back. I remember when I played my first Sonic game, I thought it was amazing, absolutely incredible, and that there was nothing like it. I had played the peak of video games, essentially. So let's go to where it all began. I got you. A lot of people seem to have started with either SA2 or Sonic 2, but I am not one of those people. Now, if we want to find my first Sonic game, we need to fast forward around half a decade or so, sometime around 2007-2008.
3, 2, 1.
Yup, this is where it all started for me. As a kid who grew up playing every game he could get his hands on for the Wii, I had quite a plethora of Sonic games I could have possibly started with, but I just so happened to stumble upon this one. What a turn of events. Now, I could go on for a while on how nowadays Secret Rings makes me sad. It's not exactly a good game, but that's not what this is about, because back then, I thought this game was one of the coolest things I ever seen. Yes, I played a good handful of games before this. I'm pretty sure in particular I was already acquainted with Mario and Crash, but something about Sonic just resonated with me more than other notable gaming mascots did, and I'm not completely sure why, but I think it had something to do with the extra layer of personality Sonic carried with him. He was fun-loving, always wanted to help others, had a little layer of cockiness, saved the world with confidence, and a smirk on his face, and most of all, he was cool, not because he was trying to be, but because his personality made him cool. It was something I couldn't get out of Mario or Crash, and while they had enjoyable personalities of their own, Sonic was a lot more grounded compared to Crash's zaniness, and he was also a bit more in-your-face about his personality than Mario was. It stuck with me a lot more. From there, I was a bona fide Sonic fan. I got every game on the Wii, got every game once I got a DS for my birthday, watched a ton of Sonic X on TV, and enjoyed every second of it. I know that might have been a bit too much explanation, and I could have just simplified it to I started with Secret Rings and my life spiraled into madness, but I wanted to start off by illustrating that I was really grasped by Sonic. Let me rephrase that. I was really captivated by Sonic, still doesn't sound right, and it led me becoming the huge fan I am today, and I feel it's necessary to convey that because my language from here on is going to be pretty harsh, and I don't want to come off as a blind Sonic hater or anything, because you gotta understand, if I didn't love the series as much as I do, I wouldn't be gearing up to yell about it like I am now. Let's start with something I'm sure a lot of Sonic fans experienced when they were kids, the internet. No, I don't mean Sonic fanfiction or something. I mean the epiphany people online gave me and a lot of others that made us realize the games we liked weren't actually good. When I was a kid and went around online for the first time and saw what people thought of the games I loved, I was absolutely shocked. What do you mean the Werehog isn't fun for a lot of people? I don't get it. Swords are cool, Sonic is cool, why don't people like this more? People really hate Secret Rings that much, huh? It was a little bit saddening to find out all the games I loved were mostly regarded as bad by most people, but despite that, just telling me the game's bad doesn't rewire my brain into also thinking they're bad. So I still continued to enjoy these games despite what the popular consensus was. So, yeah, that was life for a while. Kept playing Sonic games, kept enjoying them. There were some bumps in the road, even though I thought Lost World was good, and even today I don't think it's horrible to an extent. Even my 10-year-old self was baffled by Rise of Lyric and thought Shattered Crystal was well, just kinda there. But I mean, hey, it's fine, it was just a side series, we'll probably get some good Sonic games at some point later. Come to think of it, where are those Sonic games? So for around 3 years there, all we had were mobile spin-offs and the like. I mean, 2016 gave us Sonic Boom, Fire and Ice, but even back then I was so apathetic to all the Sonic Boom crap that I never picked it up and I still don't own the game. 2017 was set to be the turning point, the 26th anniversary at this point. When I saw those new games, God, I was so excited. I really liked the classic games, so to see Mania follow up on those with a bunch of new levels and seeing it was made by Christian Whitehead, I was ecstatic. But despite being hyped for Mania, I was all over the new Project Sonic 2017. The story looked more serious, we were back to the boost gameplay, we had Sonic and his classic counterpart, and since I adored Sonic Generations, I was freaking out because this was gonna be Generations 2. Unfortunately though, we all know how this plays out. I'm not shy about hiding my disdain for the game through a bunch of snide remarks and videos that sometimes aren't even related to Sonic. Don't worry, this game will get its time in the spotlight at some point, and I'll take pleasure in ripping into everything I hate about it. But in the meantime, it's not about Sonic Forces, it's about my reaction to it. I was so excited to play Forces that when I saw my pre-order was being delayed from coming in day one, I bought it on launch day and decided to refund the pre-order. I couldn't wait any longer. I needed to play this game now. And when I got home and I ran to my Xbox to pop it in, it was a mess. I didn't want to admit I hated the game so much that I tried so hard to hone in on the stuff I liked, tried to look past the glaring flaws, but after a while of sitting on it, I was forced to acknowledge that I saw Sonic Forces as nothing more than a failure. Now, don't get me wrong, this isn't the first game I've disliked, just for one I remember. I gave the middle finger to Wrath of Cortex long before this game, but Forces was the first game I remember hating. This shit burned me real bad. And that was it. This was the end of Sonic's 25th anniversary. What a fucking celebration, am I right? Not only that, it was the end of Sonic's games for a long 5 years. In between that time, I mean, I was still a Sonic fan, I still went back and played the games I enjoyed, but I was still left with unease for the future, and the disappointment felt from Forces was still felt for a while. Which leaves us in the now, the present day. You might have picked up on my relatively pessimistic and hesitant view towards Sonic's future in those 2 videos I made talking about Sonic-related announcements, although I could have elaborated on it way more there, not especially proud of those 2. But now it seems like we know what's going on with Sonic. I think it's good to talk about my views on where he is right now, where it seems like the franchise is heading, and how it all relates to the previous games. Now, initially for a while, it seemed like Sonic suffered from, ironically, too many games. Heroes, Shadow, and 06 were all being developed within similar time frames, and this would only expand once the planned Sonic 06 port to Wii became Secret Rings, which obviously spread time thin, and that's excluding stuff like spin-offs and handheld games. And now we have the modern day, and despite the larger time gaps between games, the quality of these games haven't seen any major improvements. Sonic Forces allegedly took 6 years total of development time, half of which was spent without a new Sonic game, and even then those were Boom games that were handled by other studios, so more like 5 years without a game since 2013 had Lost World. While Sonic Forces is better built than something like 06, disregarding how it pisses me off more, it still feels worse than games that were made when Sonic was coming out on a yearly basis, notably Generations, which Forces feels like a watered-down version of. Now we've just been seeing Sonic pop in every 5 years for an anniversary title, which I wouldn't have a problem with if the games actually coming out were fun, but they aren't. Before we had quantity with mixed quality, now we don't have quality or quantity, which sucks. It seems like more development time has done nothing to ensure these games will at least be good, even if it takes a while for them to come out. It's ironic that the mid to late 2000s are considered the dark age of Sonic, because while the quality was more scattered even when things got bad on consoles, the handhelds were still pushing out quality. There were still a few spin-off games to enjoy as well, like the Riders games and whatnot. Meanwhile, in the 2010s, the only games that immediately come to mind when I think of good Sonic games from the decade are Colors, Generations, and Mania, which is a bit sad, honestly. The one saving grace, though, is that despite how Sonic seems like he's in another one of his ruts, I don't exactly think it's unsalvageable or anything. Actually, I heavily believe in the contrary. They had the giant missteps of 06 and Rise of Lyric, both of which were so bad, their failures were widely known outside of the Sonic fanbase. And despite that, things still went on. If they were able to pick themselves back up from two failures that were that big, then I don't think there's much they can't come back from. Which is partially why I wanted to make this video. Not only do I get to air out my problems, I can also see how things can be improved by looking back on stuff that they were getting right. Because on that note, excluding the game, Sonic has been doing really good actually, which I mean is great, but also pretty sad considering this is a video game franchise. The comics and especially the movies have been popping off, and while everyone's still a bit restless because we want to see where the games are headed, most people seem to be satisfied. So what's the deal? Why are these so good, and what can the games learn from these? Seeing as the comics and the movies aren't something that you can play, that means all the important parts have to do with their story and writing, which is perfectly fine by me. It's no secret that starting with Sonic Colors, the story in these games has been left out in the rain. Games from before felt like they had some sort of direction they wanted to take with the narrative, and while sometimes the result was abysmal, they at least felt like they were trying to do something. Meanwhile, games starting with Colors felt like they were either content doing the bare minimum in terms of story, or it was hard to tell what they were even going for. Ironically, the only game in recent memory that feels like it tried to go for something narratively was Forces. From the promos to some of the visual direction and stages, it looked like it wanted to do something similar to SA2. Unfortunately, the attempt was done with the tone of Colors, and those things don't mesh at all. This is the whole reason why the comics and movies trying to actually go somewhere with the story was a big deal. That's not to say they're perfect, though. While I was totally down for the comics playing a serious story straight again, what I wasn't down for was how some of the characters were handled. The writing on characters can sometimes be a bit weird, and not to be one of the people saying Sonic should kill, cause that's dumb, but the part where Sonic just lets the Zeddy go felt a bit off. The issue, though, particularly lies with Shadow, who still feels like he was written by a 10-year-old whose only experience with the character was playing Shadow the Hedgehog's anti-villain route, which unfortunately has more to do with Sega mandates than the writers themselves. The movies, meanwhile, didn't mishandle any characters, and more so mishandled the focus. Sonic 1 had the problem of focusing too much on the humans and only really doing Sonic-y stuff near the end, which, even though there was some fun stuff before it that happened, it makes the fact that Sonic and Eggman are the only Sonic parts of the whole movie much more apparent, and it's almost as if the movie's having a bit of an identity crisis. Sonic 2 feels much more like what I want out of a Sonic movie, but it still clings too much to the human characters, and seeing as they need to flesh out the connection between Sonic and Knuckles, that means that despite being part of the logo, Tails got sidelined. I want to illustrate the problems they each have to establish that they aren't perfect, and I do have some problems with them, but despite this, they were essential to breathing the life that has been missing from these characters back in. I also say this to illustrate how the stories don't need to be the pinnacle of the franchise or without flaws to be impactful and worthwhile additions to Sonic as a series. They both can have interesting conflicts, good story progression, engaging arcs, and fantastic finales without being devoid of issues. Stories gave Sonic games this stage presence. The whole reason Secret Rings was cool to me as a kid was the journey. There was a cool presentation in the cutscenes, the locations were memorable, Sonic's life was on a time limit, we were scrambling to find the world rings, and it blew my mind when I was young. Everyone remembers how Sonic 3 conveyed its story and interconnected world wordlessly and on the Genesis. Similarly, people remember Gamma's story, Chaos slowly getting stronger, Eggman blowing up the moon, Shadow's sacrifice, and Metal Sonic's final transformation. Who remembers any story beats from Generations? The most I can think of was that mirror scene before the Death Egg robot, and that wasn't as big as anything I mentioned previously. I just thought it was a fun little moment. Sonic games are always good for having cool stories with loads of personality. You strip the personality away and you end up with a generic platforming game with some added speed. For me personally, my main requirement for a Sonic game to fulfill is just being a really fun game, but since day one, Sonic was all about this personality. We've had loads of games to see these characters grow and evolve to where many people, myself included, care about how a lot of these characters are portrayed, which is why it's rough to see them either be a shell of their former selves or just be excluded entirely. Speaking of which, I'm happy the comics have been having a fairly wide cast of characters, because recently the games have been mostly only including Sonic and Tails, with other characters being left in the background. Sonic Forces tried to bring more characters in, but it didn't really work, because the Avatar was the only playable character that wasn't Sonic and everyone else was given nothing to do. For example, let's take my favorite Sonic character, that being Silver. The only games he's been playable in are 06 and the Rivals games, not including side modes and spin-offs, and Rivals are already on the edge of spin-off territory. He got some fun interactions in Team Sonic Racing, but other than that he's been MIA, except of course for the comics. He was a big part of the Angel Island and Metal Virus arcs and appeared in his side story that gave even more time to flesh out his character, which is the most it had been fleshed out in the first place since his debut game. Which then leads us back to why people gravitated to the comics and movies so much. It brought back that personality that's been missing from Sonic for a while, and led to a bunch of memorable moments that allowed a lot of people to get reconnected to these characters, or connect with some of them for the first time. Sonic slowly getting corrupted by the Metal Virus, Mel Sonic wordlessly wondering if he's the real Sonic when he's unaffected by the virus, Sonic growing from the start of movie 1 to being sad, lonely, and unsure what to do with his power, to the end of movie 2 having family, friends, and knowing just how to be a hero. It's really cool. Obviously, this has to do with the writers of the game, starting with Colors. Pontek and Graf have been heavily criticized since the beginning of their run on Sonic, and here's the thing with this, I don't doubt their ability as writers, I just don't think writing for Sonic is their forte. I also feel like this has to do with how prior to this, they didn't really have much knowledge on the whole Sonic lore, and in an interview from around Lost World, Pontek stated he really wasn't familiar with stories such as the adventure games, and most of the accrued information was from Wikipedia articles and YouTube videos of cutscenes. Speaking of which, I'll be leaving the interview from this in the description if you're curious. Honestly, I feel like I'm a bit more lenient, I guess is the word, since I feel like I can find some parts to enjoy with their stories, but even still, it was just kinda meh overall, which is why I was happy when Ian Flynn, the writer of the comics, was revealed to be working on Frontiers. Now, with that being said, you can still respect someone while not enjoying their work, cause holy hell. Rebel Taxi did an interview with Pontek, also in the description, and it was a little sad to see that he got this much vitriol over him writing for the series. Like, yes, we can criticize their stories, we can choose not to enjoy them, but it feels like some people take it from story criticism to personal attack. This is something that happens generally with people who work on Sonic from what it seems, because in that same interview, Pontek mentioned how he was basically told by the people at Sega that it happens to everyone and to just ignore it, and that's really fucked up. I mean, if a new Sonic game comes out and it's shit, and your first reaction is to throw toxicity at the people involved in its creation, then genuinely, what is your problem and what is the goal? I have a section on the community coming up later on, but I thought it'd be best to throw it in here, because when looking at this stuff for the video, it was honestly baffling. Putting that aside though, I do have a couple of ideas for a new story in the next game. Honestly, I want something that takes itself a bit more seriously, but also has a bit more focus on the characters themselves. I thought the adventure games were both really good about having character moments and having them feel like they influence the plot in a good way. The modern games, especially Lost World, just felt like stuff happened around Sonic and he did the whole good guy thing because he has to. colors might have a more interesting setup, forces might try to tie into Generations and Mania more, but despite each game's little differences, they all have this problem. That's not saying I want every character to be in one game though, on the contrary. Ideally I'd want a very focused character roster so everyone gets some good time in the light. I know that games like Lost World had Amy and Knuckles around, but them being around is all you can really say. Tails has been more consistently there and is a bit more at the forefront, but he still isn't giving anything interesting to do, and depending on the game, I feel like he was written to be a little annoying. Now, story is one very important aspect, but I want to shed some light on a lesser talked about subject that isn't as important as story, but holds a place as being notable for the series. In the time gap from Sonic Forces to 2022, where new games started to be rolled out, there was another game released. A game that came and went so quickly that I wouldn't even be surprised if you forgot it happened. Anyone remember Team Sonic Racing? They know what they did. Look, spin-offs and side modes are the least of our worries here, but they reflect a larger issue with the Sonic series, so just stick with me here. Spin-offs are separated into three distinct categories, those being riders, kart racing, and other random stuff. Now, of these, Riders is easily my favorite. It was so Sonic, a spin on a pre-existing genre, but fitting in with his attitude by taking a more extreme sports angle with hoverboards and a skill curve that made getting into the game harder than something like Mario Kart, but made things extremely satisfying when you knew what you were doing. The two Sonic Riders games both hold a special place in my heart. That's not to spig on the kart racing trilogy here, but it felt like they abandoned something special that you could only get from Sonic Riders to take the easy way out. Doesn't help that I personally found Team Sonic Racing to be a big disappointment and a strict downgrade from Transformed. Speaking of which, I feel like one of the reasons I majorly preferred Riders was, aside from the transforming gimmick, these games feel like they could be any game series kart racing games and it'd work fine enough. You know how I know that? Cars 3 Driven to Win, everyone's favorite video game, is basically the original All-Stars Racing, but with more systems in place to make things arguably more mechanically interesting and fun. No, that is not a joke. Then there's the random stuff, which is, well, random. There's Sonic R, Shuffle, Fighters, Battle, Spinball, Pinball Party, and Mean Bean Machine. The main overarching issue that reflects on the whole series that I mentioned earlier has to do with how sometimes Sonic Team fucks something up, and then they just stop. Either that, or they switch things up for no reason, and kill it off 5 seconds later. They were committed to Sonic Riders, then they tried to do one with the Kinect, and I still have nightmares of the outcome. They did a Sonic fighting game, tried to give it another go with Battle, but because it was shafted to the GBA, this means it was meant to die, and we haven't had another Sonic fighting game since. They threw out a random on-foot Sonic racing game with barely any content on a system that was on life support as soon as it was made, and it doesn't do well, throw it in the trash. Give us a party game out of nowhere that also inevitably does bad because it was also placed on a console that was going out the door? Yup, and never doing that again. This is the same with the mainline Series 2. We had the adventure formula for a while, but then 06 came along and that hasn't come back since. They threw the boost formula in the gutter for a small bit to us with the curveball of Lost World, then that got thrown in the trash when it didn't work out, then they did something completely different for the Boom games. The 3D formula died because Rise of Lyric, this trash can, is getting a workout. Meanwhile, the 2D formula got 2 goes until they threw Boom in the trash entirely. This even branches out of gameplay styles and into gameplay concepts. It feels like we're still feeling the after effects of the Sonic Stupid Friends era, since when we get another character, the other character is Sonic. You know what, I'll give it credit to Forces, the custom character was a pretty good non-Sonic addition, and they included Shadow in some form or fashion, but I just need more. I want to see characters that are fun to play as, are distinct from Sonic, and don't hamper the overall gameplay experience. I still remember and get mad at the pre-release for Sonic 4 Episode 1, slowly checking off that don't worry all you huge Sonic fans at Polygon, we don't have any of those guys in this game, it's Sonic only, baby. I know after 06 they were being slammed with having less characters real hard, but this is such an annoying, borderline condescending way of doing it. You didn't like all the other characters, so we're going back to Sonic 1, only the main man himself, because the games that had other characters were all failures. Dude, shut the hell up. Just like the other shit, 06 had a sizable cast of characters, and since 06 did the whole sucking asshole thing, getting other playable characters is now an event when before it was something that remained relatively consistent. The only time a formula got brought back after a bit was the boost formula for when forces showed up, but that's the equivalent of trying to revive somebody and then being brought back as a zombie, and now we have this kinda open-worlding boost hybrid game. Even worse is that this switch-up was happening with the handheld titles at the same time it was happening with the console titles. To ignore stuff like Battle and Sonic Drift, which were obviously side games, the classic games went on for longest between Sonic 1 8-bit on the Game Gear to Advance 1 on the GBA, but then we got rid of that in favor of a more fast-paced deal for Advance 2, and then Advance 3 tried to mesh the styles and add a partner system. When the DS rolled around, we got the 2D boost with Rush, which stuck around until the 3DS. There were the aforementioned 2D Boom games, and weirdly enough, the only handheld entry to have the same gameplay style as their console version is Lost World, actually. Sonic has like 5 different gameplay styles under his belt with different counterparts depending on if they're 2D, 3D, console, handheld, or if they just feel like being funky. Similar to spin-offs and gameplay styles, I don't think they should just be axing the side modes. Were they as much of a part of Sonic's identity as things previously mentioned? No, but I still feel like it was a special little part of it, and yes, this is mostly about the Chow Garden. As someone who spent nearly 10 minutes of his SA2 review talking exclusively about it, and I could have kept on going way longer than that, I think it's about time it was brought back. But even putting that aside, sometimes Sonic games would just include random alternate modes for the sake of being fun. Stuff like multiplayer modes that have been excluded from modern titles, even at their worst in something like Black Knight, it was still a neat little inclusion on the side, and at their best, like in SA2, it's something I still like playing. Sonic 06 had a boss rush and additional side missions, assuming I actually want to play them is fucking hilarious, but it was still nice to have. All that is baby shit though. Why does no one talk about the fact they included an entire party game as a side mode in Secret Rings? I'm probably the only person who unironically likes it, but it was a neat little feature. It probably would have been better to scrap this in favor of making the actual game better, but regardless. What's funny is that this experimentation is something I actually used to like about Sonic. I liked how he was able to divert from the core gameplay to try something new, being a sword-slashing adventure, hoverboard racer, or Arabian fever dream. It was cool. Now though, that doesn't matter to me anymore, because unlike back then, there's nothing to fall back on, so if experimentation has to die for consistency, that's fine by me. Additionally, I feel like the switching of gameplay formulas has only served to divide an already divided fanbase, since now everyone has a different idea of what their ideal Sonic game is like. I don't hate anyone for that, just so you're aware. Opinions are opinions. If you think Black Knight is the pinnacle of the series, good on you, man. But I feel like we wouldn't have nearly as much division if they stuck to one thing. So here's what I propose should be done to solve this problem. First, we should have 2 distinct forms of Sonic. Starting with the 2D ventures, we should continue where Mania left off, giving people their classic Sonic fix and allowing it to be expanded upon with new characters, stages, etc. Next should be our 3D Sonic stuff, and personally, I don't care what formula they use. Adventure, boost, something entirely new, doesn't matter to me. Just make it fun and don't abandon it as soon as the game turns out subpar, and instead learn from the mistakes to make it better. The 3D games is also going to be home of our new side modes. Chow Garden is a must, but I feel like this is where they could experiment with other stuff since it shouldn't affect the quality of the game itself. Although, again, these aren't a requirement, and if they need to be axed for more dev time on the main stuff, then that's a good thing. Lastly, for spin-offs. Personally, I bring back Riders since it felt like the quintessential mix of something new you couldn't get anywhere else, fun gameplay, and Sonic style. Ideally for me, a Riders 4 would be great, especially if it takes cues from the first game while making things more accessible like Zero Gravity, although they should sprinkle in every once in a while a new kart racing Sonic game, just to have a more traditional kart racing experience for those who can't get into Riders. Also, make it have Sega instead of just Sonic stuff, since that's a lot more interesting in my opinion, especially if Riders is going to be accompanying it. So, story check, gameplay check, spin-offs also check. What else can we get down to? Art direction? That can be saved for each game's individual videos. Graphics? I actually still think Sonic games haven't been that bad in the graphics department. Although graphics are a bit more than just fidelity, it also takes into consideration what you're looking at specifically, like the levels and... Oh, the levels. Okay, here we go. Hey, wanna hear something hilarious? Sonic Colors was the last time we got completely original and interesting levels in this series. Ooh, slays them every time. If you're not laughing, you're crying, folks. Look, I get it, nostalgia's a fun little thing, but these things can turn into an addiction if you're not careful, and Sonic's definitely got a nostalgia addiction. Now, nostalgia isn't always a bad thing, sometimes it can even be pretty damn cool. Should have seen what my pants look like after playing Generations for the first time. That was a trick question, I wasn't wearing any. But there's a big difference between good and bad nostalgia, and even then you need to know when to just quit it. Got two columns here, both of which will be explained thoroughly. For good nostalgia, there's Generations and Mania. For bad nostalgia, there's Forces and Sonic 4. We'll start with the good so it makes it easier to explain how the bag fucks it up. We'll start with Generations. It was set to be a celebration of everything Sonic was up to this point. There was a modern and a classic Sonic to pay respects to both periods of the series, and every mainline game, minus a few random ones, was given a level. It showed confidence in how they even represented games like 06, because while they weren't highly regarded, it was still Sonic and was treated as such. On top of that, level themes were remixed, and in the case of the modern versions of Genesis stages and the classic versions of the new stuff, they had to make something completely new out of something old. In some cases, they even tried to improve upon mistakes, like in the case of Crisis Siggy's revised Tornado, or retrofitting the new gameplay styles to the original set pieces, like how running down the building in Speed Highway is now a faster-paced quick-step section. Despite how they were meant to be callbacks, they still weren't afraid to change things up or throw things in that were exclusive to the Generations versions of levels. For a few examples, the giant chopper in Green Hill, the truck chasing you the entire time in Classic's version of Siggy Escape, or the goalpost flying away in Crisis City. In my opinion, Generations is a great example of nostalgia done right, mixing the best of the new with the best of the old while throwing in its own new ideas in there. Mania does a lot of what I described with Generations as well. While it wasn't as special to see stages like Green Hill and Chemical Plant again, since they'd been done not too long ago, they still do enough new to make them worthwhile revisits, even if in the case of Chemical Plant it probably should have just been a new level entirely by the time Act 2 rolled around. They also go even further in throwing new stuff in by incorporating 4 new levels, and they're the best ones in the entire game. While they do revisit a lot of other levels, they mix it up by, again, incorporating new ideas, and this time even ideas from levels not represented. Stuff like having the electrical mines connected to the wires from Wacky Workbench and Flying Battery, and the conveyor belts from Quartz Quadrant being in Lava Reef. Even the orbs from Sonic 3's bonus stages in Titanic Monarch are here. These two games are great examples of how these things can be done right, and it's no surprise that they're considered by many people, including myself, as some of the best in the series. So then let's start with Sonic 4. How does this one completely miss the point? To start with Episode 1, because it's easily the most egregious of the two, it immediately shows its hand as a parasitic leech that tries to pass off the work of other people as its own. Splash Hill, Casino Street, Lost Labyrinth, Mag Gear, man, who do you think you're fooling? They barely have anything to call their own. Lost Labyrinth and Mag Gear are the best here, I guess, because of the torches, rolling balls, steam that launches you, and the inevitable March of Death. But even then, I hate all the gimmicks in Lost Labyrinth, so it ain't getting off that easy. You could have easily retitled them all to the names of the zones they're clearly ripping off, and it would have been like nothing's changed. Episode 2 feels like it wants to dip its toes into the realm of originality, but is shackled to the uninspired, nostalgia-hungry habits of Episode 1. Sylvania Castle, Oil Desert, and Sky Fortress, they're all unoriginal, and what's sadder is that they didn't have to be. They have gimmicks to call their own, and I don't hate these ones, dare I say I actually enjoyed them. And for Sylvania Castle particularly, the level looks pretty distinct, but they feel the need to call back to past games for no reason. Even worse, they have a completely new level, White Park Zone, and while it feels like it wants to be something cool, it just doesn't hit the best of what it could possibly be, which is depressing, because that just makes it feel like they can only have good ideas if they're already jumping off the back of something done before. Then we have Forces, the king of unoriginality. There are 9 different stages that take place in Green Hill, 5 different chemical plant stages, and 5 fucking Death Egg stages, Jesus Christ. Doesn't help that when Forces isn't directly using old zones, it has the Sonic 4 problem of stealing ideas from older games and putting a new label on it. Here's an even less version of Silent Forest from Lost World with the casino gimmick, have fun. Even then, with new themes that they make an attempt for, even those fall flat because the Eggman Fortress levels feel like they could have been cool, but the tag team stage is a shitty quick-step level, the Sonic level is over in 5 seconds, and the classic level is the bane of my existence. This game pisses me off. On top of that, they don't do anything interesting with the old ideas. I can safely say, with the exception of Arsenal Pyramid, all of the Green Hill stages have absolutely nothing to add to the level's main concept, especially compared to Generations, Mania, hell, I'd even say Sonic 4 Episode 2 adding more of the reused levels than Forces did. Even games without explicitly reused level themes just don't have the same great ideas for levels that games like Colors, Unleashed, even 06 had. Lost World had its generic Mario level layouts that, like, it wasn't horrible, but it wasn't that interesting, and come on, Windy Hill, are you kidding me? Then there's all of Sonic Boom, which was just so uninspired and boring that I barely have anything to say about it. Is there any reason why we can't have complete originality in these games with the same quality from before? I mean, did they run out of ideas, stop caring, or are they really banking that much on nostalgia, because either way it sucks? And now we got Frontiers coming out that has cyberspace levels that, oh look, Green Hill, Chemical Plant, and Sky Sanctuary. And apparently they're reusing level designs from Generations 2, which is stupid no matter what justification they give for it. So, while the actual games themselves have either been MIA or shitting the bed, the community has to be out and doing something, right? Well, in fact, they are, and there's a whole lot to say, both good and bad, and before I get to this part, I want to set up some ground rules. 1. For the love of God, please listen completely to what I have to say first. I'm not doing this to piss on people's fun or anything like that. It's perfectly fine to disagree with what I have to say, but please get to the end before saying anything in the comments, and please be civil. Similarly, in accordance with being civil, 2. Don't harass anybody over this stuff. I'm not going to be naming any people in either the good or bad sections, both because it isn't needed and to not point giant arrows at anybody. This is a series about a blue hedgehog who runs fast, so if you see me talking about stuff in the fast blue hedgehog community and your first instinct is to harass people, then please get the fuck off of my channel because you aren't welcome here. With that, let's move on to the next section. Fan games, animations, videos, other random projects, it's like Christmas morning. When the Sonic community is performing optimally, they are some of the most creative and passionate people I've seen in the gaming space. A lot of these projects actually show strengths in areas that have made a note about how the official stuff has been waning, which is impressive for people working entirely off their love for the series. You want good story content? How about some Sonic and Tails R? It's this little radio drama thingy that brings in a lot of past voice actors, and goddamn, they still got it. Hearing Jason Griffith as Shadow again in particular had me really hyped up, and Ryan Drummond still does a kick-ass Sonic voice. The big inspiration from particularly the adventure games in 06 was great at expanding a bunch of story beats from those games in cool and interesting ways. It kept me engaged throughout all of its episodes, and I was always excited to see what would happen next. Stellar work here. There's projects like SA2 Reanimated, a giant animation project that reimagines tons of scenes from Adventure 2 and a lot of different art styles, and then it got locked down to kids content, goddammit YouTube. There's a bunch of people trying to make the third and final season of Sonic Sad AM a reality through the plans made by the original team, which is insane, and I also quite liked that Crushing Your 30s song and animation that went with it, a fun tribute to Sonic's anniversary. Obviously, though, out of all of them, I'm smitten with the Sonic fan games. I touched on two of these when talking about Sonic at the Game Awards a while back. Sonic Project Hero being one of the best displays of movement, momentum, and control I've seen in one of these fan projects. I'm a simple man. When I can control my momentum and speed in a fun way, all of my dopamine receptors go off at once. Then, of course, there's Sonic Utopia, another one I talked about, being a great translation of Sonic into the open world, taking inspiration from both the classic and adventure parts of the series, but besides those two, there were others I enjoyed as well. Sonic GT was an incredibly fun time where you get a good flow going and manage your speed. It feels incredible. Probably one of the standouts for keeping that momentum that was integral to Sonic alive. So much so that I've actually considered speedrunning it multiple times. I love this one. Gotta mention Project 06 because, oh my lord, it turned Sonic 06 from something I wouldn't want to be near in a dark alley into something that is on par with the adventure games. I'd definitely be open to making a video on this one in particular because in a way, it makes me sad 06 came out so half-baked, because if I fully realized 06 is like this, it would have ended up being one of my favorite Sonic games. This shit is fantastic. Sonic Smackdown is a full Sonic fighting game, which is something I've wanted for a really long time. I'm not the best at these types of fighting games, I gotta be honest, but I had a fun time with this, and if you're into the 2D side of things, might I recommend Sonic Time Twisted. I remember this being a classic fan game from a while back. It takes a lot of inspiration from Sonic CD, but actually utilizes it a bit better if you ask me. Definitely check this one out. Additionally, for more 2D action, there's Sonic Dimensions, a game that functionally plays most similar to Sonic Rush. It was really great and makes it all the more sad that I don't see people talking about it much. Plus, it has the advanced sprites and a really difficult Eggman Land stage. Both of those are good in my book. On top of that, there's also a dedicated modding community for what feels like every Sonic game as soon as it comes out. Within like 5 days of Sonic Origins coming out, there were people modding in stuff like Sonic 3's original soundtrack and lives into the game, Mania, the adventure games, even Forces still get some cool mods to this day. Forces in particular getting multiple overhaul mods that try and make the game something worth looking in the eye. I think the most stagnant mods got for a Sonic game was Lost World, and even then it has some interesting ones. There's a lot of level mods for every game, especially Generations and Mania, and character swaps for these games as well. If a game doesn't let you play as Shadow, I guarantee he'll have a mod in progress day one. Let me go through some off the top of my head. The Misfits pack for Mania, which added 4 new stages. Labyrinth Zone got some really nice outside areas, and they had the balls to bring back Wacky Workbench of all stages and make it actually good. Generations has far too many level mods, but Arrow Garden stands out being an original stage. Pretty old mod at this point, but it has a special place in my heart. It's fun to speedrun, tons of paths to run through. I used to spend multiple hours just messing around in this stage. Plus, there's also Water Palace, which is a really fun conversion. I'd actually never played this one for a while, but when getting mod gameplay for this video, I decided to check it out, and it's an amazing conversion. It looks really nice, also has a lot of pathways. Hell, it's better than the official Water Palace we got in the 3DS version. Speaking of which, the golden child of Sonic modding is Generations. People have modded it so hard that sometimes you can't even tell what Sonic game is being played. Hell, nowadays, if you put enough mods into Generations, you couldn't tell it apart from Unleashed or Colors, depending on what's installed. People are even working on modding in the other Wisp from Colors. I remember seeing Laser in particular, a full conversion of the Werehog into the game. Someone even put the barrels from Donkey Kong Country in, and I wish I saved the Twitter video to show it. It really goes to show that when the Sonic community is passionate about something, they go absolutely insane in the best way possible. Keep in mind, there's a ton of other stuff I could have gone into as well. There's a lot of other YouTube projects, obviously, a ton of fan games, and a whole hell of a lot of mods. These are all wonderful, but the ones I covered are just the ones I have experience with. 2, I have a lot of stuff to talk about in my next section, so I figured let's keep things moving a bit, shall we? And 3, I can't help myself, so I'll probably inevitably make videos on at least a couple fan game projects, so don't get mad if I didn't mention your favorite one. As I alluded to previously, though, not all is perfect in the Sonic community, and I do have some qualms I would like to talk about. And again, I'd like to talk about them with civility. I'll preface with the disclaimers I shared with you previously, and with that, let's continue. So I wasn't exactly super active on social media around when Sonic Forces came out, but from what I hear, the collision chaos in the fandom was just as apparent back then as it was for Frontiers. However, this was the first time I was able to experience it firsthand for both Frontiers and Origins, and it feels like no matter what opinion you have on the game, you will be obliterated online. It's so weird. There's people who are both overly negative and overly positive, and both annoy the hell out of me. Let's start with the former. I'm all for good criticism, but at some point you start to just end up bashing people who are genuinely excited for the game, which I don't care if it looks like the worst game ever made, don't do that. If you're pleased with Origins, Colors Ultimate, Frontiers, whatever, then you are settling for less, which is really annoying and reductive. Like, sure, I see a lot of problems with these games that affect my enjoyment of them in varying quantities, and I might question you in Colors Ultimate's case, but if they look good to you, you acknowledge their problems and have fun despite them, then more power to you. I'm happy you can find fun where I might not, which just makes it piss me off all the more when I see people say you're a bootlicker for presenting your opinion in a respectful manner. There's an extreme example of multiple people getting doxxed just because they were excited for Frontiers, which is completely insane to me. Now, I know, as should you, the viewer, that this doesn't reflect the people who are being critical of Frontiers, or any Sonic game for that matter. I would know I was one of them. But it goes to show how the community can get out of hand fast, and no matter what opinion you have around here, you're somebody's target. But to me, I actually take more issue with the overly positive side of the fanbase because holy hell, some people will blindly accept and defend everything the franchise does, decrying anything that isn't overwhelming praise because God forbid anyone give any constructive criticism around here. Hell, I wouldn't be surprised if I got a ton of people about to have a fucking aneurysm because I dare say something negative because you can't criticize the games or any of the fanbase lest you be ostracized like you're some kind of antichrist. You could be declared by both Sega and God as objectively the biggest Sonic fan, but as soon as you dare to get upset because you're being handed half-baked, rushed, and underwhelming products time and time again without any signs of slowing, you'll have a platoon of people to say you aren't a real fan or want to see the series fail. My nutsack. Having people say that you don't really like the series, or that maybe just because you're simply dissatisfied with the series, that it isn't for you anymore. It just feels so condescending and deflecting. Like, could you honestly imagine, if I made this long-ass video heavily discussing a series I wasn't even a fan of in the first place? I mean, personally, if I don't like a franchise, I just won't talk about it, not make a giant video essay on it. This forced positive outlook seems to bleed into how previous games were perceived on release. Now, everyone can have their own opinions, but where I get upset is where people say that the initial reactions to the game were unjustified, which is completely absurd. Take Unleashed, for example. Everyone thought the game was mixed to bad, which seems crazy due to the positive reception it has today. But you gotta understand, it was a different time with the franchise in a different position. After 06, it was completely justified how people could have concerns over stuff like the Werehog, how the game in some parts could barely hold a stable frame rate on both consoles, and that's not to mention how the damage 06 did to Sonic's reputation heavily influenced how people saw the games back then, and I'd argue still does. Look, I love Unleashed, but if you blindly defend what you love instead of acknowledging the problems it has while still loving it, we are doomed to repeat the same shortcomings over and over again. So when I see that the footage of Sonic Frontiers provided to the masses that is supposed to give us an idea of what to expect from the upcoming game looks like it's gonna fall short in multiple areas once again, yeah, I'm upset. On the note of criticism and how reviewers see the series, the whole cycle prior to Sonic 2 coming out was unbelievable, man. Everyone loves critics when they're given the movie uncontested praise, but the second one guy dares to say that he didn't enjoy the movie that much for what aren't unvalid reasons, suddenly it's, what do the critics know anyway? Like, no, it doesn't work like that. You can't praise the critics because your confirmation bias having ass only thinks that the positive opinions matter, and then completely obsolete critics when they say something you don't agree with. Sure, there were a few small cases of critics making some poor arguments that I feel warranted backlash for being plain stupid. On that same token, though, the amount of fucking times I saw people going rabid about negative reviews from critics when they hadn't even gotten the chance to see the movie in question yet is unbelievable. Could you imagine if Sonic 2 had come out and actually was pretty bad? What would that look like? Would people backpedal, switch teams, and get pissed at people who like the movie? Jesus Christ. This is a general problem the Sonic community seems to have, where if you disagree with someone, it's never just a difference in opinion. People will see it as a personal attack against their character and have your ass for it. Seeing people get kinda miffed at pre-release footage showing the game not working properly, only for them to have their ass beat in those damn quote retweets, it's impossible to be displeased without having the Horde come after you. Also, back to Frontiers, I can hear some people saying right now, God Hyper, you're so hard to please, you want something better than Sonic Forces and you got it. And, yeah, I did. Does that mean anything, though? Sonic Forces fell below the quality standard of games created back in 2008. Hell, games created back in 2001. Me saying Frontiers looks better than Forces isn't a glowing mark of commendation. It is the literal bare minimum they could have done for this game. If that makes me a fake Sonic fan, then I'm not so sure I want to be a real one then. Why do I have to be satisfied with the bare minimum? Like, great, it looks better than the video game equivalent of being flicked in the balls. It just looks like it has incredible amounts of jank and like it'll be another disappointment. It's not the bottom of the barrel, shouldn't be worthy of praise. I've seen multiple game series where games better than the worst Sonic can offer get obliterated by their respective fan bases. Just for some franchises I'm into, Crash of the Titans and Mind Over Mutant are really hated, and I think they're way better than something like Secret Rings. Similarly, Mega Man and Bass is hated, and I'd rank it above a lot of C-tier Sonic games. Paper Mario Sticker Star was regarded as the death of Paper Mario as a sub-series, and yeah, it was a slog, but I'd still be willing to do a full playthrough of it again before I completely ran through Rise of Lyric. Why is Sonic the only series where I have to be content with it simply doing enough to not be regarded as an abject failure? The bar Sonic needs to clear at this point is that it isn't a buggy mess, which I think I look forward to games being fun. I don't look at this big reveal at the damn Game Awards and be like, oh boy, I hope this one doesn't break. I'm really looking forward to the part where it functions. I can't wait for when it comes out and I can see it not fuck up firsthand. Which, hey, if I wanted something I can get from Sonic and nowhere else, then I sure did get that. But we're not done with the rant, oh hell no, because sometimes it feels like hate comes from within. I feel like we can all relate. But during the mid to late 2010s, I feel like we saw Sonic at his most self-destructive on social media. Now, where do I start with this debacle? I don't inherently hate Sonic trying to be hip and cool on the Twitters and whatnot. In an era where the Duolingo bird can make obscene jokes about spurting Nickelodeon slime, I think it's fine for Sonic to do a few funnies. In fact, it started off fine if you ask me, with some snide remarks and Sonic.exe references? What the hell? I get the Sonic Twitter account being a little snarky, indulging in a fine meme or two. He's supposed to be the rude dude with the toot, I'm fine with that, but it feels like they lean too much into making fun of themselves and it's really embarrassing and a little insulting. The type of social media presence Sonic had for a bit there was really hard to watch at points from around 2017 to early to mid-2020. And again, I don't care about them making memes and other stuff inherently. What I do care about is them dunking on themselves for brownie points, which comes off as sad and, dare I say, cringe. The one that probably stuck with me most was when the Sonic movie design was revealed as being an affront to God, and we got this picture on Twitter, which, okay, I guess. It was just constantly laughing at themselves, and eventually you make yourself the joke so many times, people start to see you as the joke. It is the pinnacle of when self-deprecating humor just becomes annoying, and when this is basically all Sonic's presence is for 5 years, without games, eventually you want the jokes to stop. Doesn't help that this type of thing felt like it was bleeding into the games themselves, with a bit of the writing from Forces and parts of Team Sonic Racing being screwy, and actively promoting Sonic games using people who don't like the games, which don't even get me started on that shit. Why can't they just learn from their mistakes without retroactively dissing the games that were supposed to be big leaps for Sonic? Why do we gotta spend so much time laughing at Shadow 06 or Rise of Lyric for the funnies, instead of trying to be a better series by understanding why those games failed in the ways they did? And yeah, everyone likes to mention that one tweet they made for good reason, because haha, 06 loading screen and Sonic finally found his footing in 3D with colors because all these other games were bad, even though even games like Adventure 1 and Heroes were received relatively well at releasing. Wait a minute, that one game was really praised, is in 3D, and is still enjoyed today. What the hell is that? I'm happy that they're mostly moving away from it. It seems now Twitter's used for random fun stuff, nice art, the occasional non-demeaning joke or meme sprinkled in. Another Sonic.exe reference, one is weird, twice as alarming. Although I was browsing around one day and saw commotion over this screenshot. Now, I could be looking way too deep into this, so take this as more of a conversation starter than hard evidence or whatever. The heart could just be, hey, happy you like our shit. But this says to me that they're throwing Lost World and Forces under the bus. Mainly Forces, because that game's original intent was to have a more serious, high-stakes story that's described here, and them seemingly agreeing with the sentiment is basically denouncing the game's effort. Don't get me wrong, I love dogging on Forces, but when the people making the games do it, it just doesn't sit right with me, especially since it was originally marketed as this new celebration of Sonic. All it does is make me wonder how long is it gonna be before we get those same stupid jokes about Lost World and Forces in a similar vein to 06 and Rise of Lyric, and we end up in the cycle we were in before. In fact, to go even further with this, if we wait some years, will we even start seeing those jokes made about Frontiers even? I just want them to take the good with the bad, because I feel like that'll make the social media presence more positive, as well as make the games more willing to dabble in ideas that got messed up and make them as good as they were originally meant to be. Basically, what I'm saying is I want Sonic to have some confidence. It feels like he wants to fake confidence by making these leaps while also not wanting to commit to them fully, cause then he can always go back on his mistakes and just make it into a joke later. Like, dude, even when Bubsy came back, it felt like he had more confidence than modern Sonic. Bubsy, the character so ragged on who failed so many times in so many horrible ways that I expect them to be taking the piss out of themselves. Even the marketing for Frontiers seems to lack confidence. One day they're giving us full gameplay that leaves us with more questions than answers. The next day they're giving us a trailer that offers us completely nothing, with them not willing to show us what the game is really made out of. So, that's it then. I'm dissatisfied with the current state of the franchise. I hate how glimmers of hope aren't expanded upon. I am annoyed how good ideas are just tossed out, and I'm also upset how I constantly have to observe the undesirable parts of the fanbase. So, why do I like this series? What keeps me saying that Sonic the Hedgehog is my favorite video game franchise despite all this? Sonic the Hedgehog is a series full of games I hold memories with, games I can pop in at any time, and some of them are just games to turn on when I'm having a bad day and when I have fun. It can be an incredible time and is something that has stuck with me for my entire life. It can bring me back to my childhood, be a safe bet when I'm bored, and even be examples of why I love video games. There's a lot going on here with me and this blue bastard, and even now typing up the script it's a little hard to put into words, so please bear with me. I guess I'll just start with this. Remember a while back when I was talking about personality? Yeah, when I went on that whole rant I was talking about the characters, but I think it's good to note the importance of the design and personality of the worlds. Almost every Sonic game contains a bunch of super memorable levels, and many of them are my favorite locations in video games. There's so much visual variety, so many striking landmarks, and sometimes even a surprising amount of atmosphere and ambience to places that you'll blaze through in a couple minutes. There's this website I found that lets you no-clip around video game maps, and one of the games they had there was Sonic Colors, and I spent a while just taking in the scenery, checking things out, and getting a new appreciation for these stages, giving new perspective to the life they breathed into stages like Aquarium Park and Tropical Resort, which were some of my favorites to look around in. On top of this, there's also the characters themselves. There's a reason Sonic OCs are so prevalent. I love the look of these guys. They have such appealing designs to where it's cool when they just show up for the sake of being able to see them again. There's a reason why I've tried certain games out specifically for stuff like cross-promotional items with Sonic, and while I don't hold all of them in high regard, fuck Ninjala, I think it goes to show how much I like these characters. There's always these really cool set pieces in the games too. That first trip through Angel Island, the showdown against the Bio-Lizard running on water in Kingdom Valley, facing off against Perfect Dark Gaia, jumping across planets in Asteroid Coaster, seeing Studiopolis for the first time, and yes, even that first showdown with Infinite. Oh yeah, and pretty much the entirety of Generations. I love that game. All these are moments I hold close to my heart. Most people have a comfort game, but this is a bit of a comfort series for me. Sonic is just so constantly distinct despite the varied track record that he always provides an experience that I feel I can't get out of other video game franchises. Plus, when Sonic gets good, he gets like some of my favorite games of all time sorts of good. This hit me extremely hard during the Sonic Symphony, the only time where I think pretty much everyone was happy. A powerful celebration of the entire franchise with multiple moments bringing me close to tears, which drove home that no matter the highs or lows the series goes through, I'll probably always be a Sonic fan and always love the series. I can relive or remember annoying and maddening experiences with the Sonic franchise, and in recent times taking blow after blow with Sonic and just wanting it to get better, it sometimes leaves me in the space of wondering why I even still care about the series in the first place. But on that same token, I get to relive or remember some great stuff that I love about the franchise, especially in cases like playing Generations and SA2, games I absolutely adore, two of my favorite games of all time. And that just reminds me why Sonic is my favorite video game series. There's always just some cool idea to hang on to with each of these games. Even when Sonic completely fumbles the most basic of things, it's always got something there, something genuinely fun or cool, something that keeps me holding on for just a little bit longer, to where even for the games I really don't like, I can't completely hate them, and no matter what, I feel like they always have charm to them. Because of this, I also have a lot of memories with pretty much every Sonic game I've played from the best to the worst. There's always something notable to remember, which I think means something. As you've probably picked up by the fact that I've made a ton of videos on this series, even starting making videos with the Sonic game, I am very passionate about this stuff. It hits all the right notes for me. The gameplay has a learning curve and feels satisfying and flowing when mastered. I feel a heavy attachment to the characters and the stories they're involved in. There's a whole bunch of lore to this world without being incomprehensible, I'm looking at you, to where it's cool to get invested in it and see how certain games connect to each other, making for great discussion on even the most underutilized of characters or forgotten of games. At this point, dude, you could ask me about any aspect of the series and I'd give you a dissertation long enough to fill a half-hour video bare minimum, which is why the recent timeline of Sonic games upsets me. Having to go through the 5 stages of grief over the course of half a decade for a franchise I adore is rough, but also shows how I want Sonic to keep improving. When it stumbles, I'm gonna have something to say about it, and those are gonna be my most thought out and vocal opinions, because when I make a video, I write my opinions with a good deal of reverence, and that goes double for Sonic. Like, I genuinely think that no singular game, series, anything was as important or influential to me as Sonic was and still is. This series gave me an immense appreciation for video games as a whole, and as silly as it is considering the one that did this is Secret Rings of all games, it really did show me as a kid that video games could be more than just driving on fun courses or playing some sports. It's still just as important to me now as it ever was, and even if I've been a bit worn out by the series, I still have at least a little excitement for each new release. And you know what? That's why I get so mad at this stuff, because I've seen how good Sonic can be, and it's not like I've lost hope completely. I get upset when they make a story of nothing, because they've made stories that I care about and I'm attached to before this. I get pissed when they decide to reuse and rip off their own locations, because they've made a bunch of insane and awesome levels already. I'm mad when the gameplay doesn't check out because they've rung with a solid foundation to make some great and really fun stuff in the past. I'm sad when they can't make a good game because they've done it multiple times, and I don't think they're incapable of doing it again. I'm gonna keep on playing these games, keep on making videos on them, and hopefully keep on enjoying Sonic, which is why I figured there was no better time to make this video than before we jump into this new frontier. Sonic the Hedgehog, he sure has an interesting reputation nowadays. One of victory, one of failure, and one that I'll be along for the ride with for a long, long time. With that, we close out this video. Figure I'll give a small recap since I've been talking for a long time and try to encapsulate my thoughts on Sonic and what I want in a short sentence, so here goes. Make the stories be well written with importance and personality with an optional focus on underutilized characters. Stick to a gameplay formula so that it can be continually refined over time instead of throwing it out as soon as it's bad, while still not being afraid to try new things using experience gained from previous games. Make new and unique locations. If I see Green Hill one more time, I will end it all. The Sonic community is filled with incredibly talented people. Make Sonic have more confidence in himself. And finally, it doesn't matter if you like or don't like something, they are both equally valid so long as you support your argument and not shut your ears like a child when the opposing argument is displayed. That was not a short sentence, my English teachers would be horrified. If you bothered to watch this far, I want to extend a personal thank you to you, the viewer. This was a huge passion project for me and has been in the works since that first adventure video I made a while back at this point. Actually, in the middle of recording some of my audio, I was able to look through the history of the Google Doc I wrote in, and it goes all the way back to March of 2021, like multiple months before I made that video, which is a bit insane that it took this long, but here it is, I guess. And yeah, just thanks for watching some random guy on the internet talk for an hour about some video game franchise. You've done your good deed of the day. So as always, I hope you enjoyed the video, take care, and I will most certainly see you all later.